So this comes from Black Magic. Oh, thanks, Stacy. This is coming from Black Magic, Unlocking Our Ancestral Power. There's a website called afropunk.com. So a huge part of many African traditional religions is the remembrance, celebration, and guidance of ancestors. In order to practice Palo Mayombe, one must have lineage to the Congo. Palo Mayombe is not a religion you find, it finds you. And just for context, the reason I'm sharing this is because I am very careful about sharing things that are not of my own culture. And I preface that by saying, having done some lineage work and knowing that my family ancestors come from the Congo, I feel somewhat okay reading this. But I also feel like it's important to preface it some with a little bit of intro. So like many African religions, Palo Mayombe is nature-based with deities found in nature and given human attributes to make them more relatable and understandable. Just like Abrahamic religions, Palo Mayombe follows a code and set of rules, with one of its most important aspects, the need to remember and respect one's ancestors. We used our ancestors to progress in life. When we went away from that, we lost our power. We've been indoctrined into believing that talking to our ancestors is evil. Your ancestors only die when you stop speaking their name. They're never dead. Black people globally, if we only knew the power we have through our ancestors. So, and then it ends with, as we continue our quest to unveil our Black boy joy or harness our Black girl magic, we would do well to remember that we come from a long line of folks that have accomplished the impossible. So right now I'm calling in two ancestors, one who passed recently. This is a picture of a dear friend and mentor of mine. She's actually the baby in the arms of her mother. And she just passed just a little bit over 70 years old. Her name was Lorna C. Hill. So I'm calling in Lorna C. Hill. She passed in Buffalo, June 30th. And Lorna was an amazing leader, and she taught me to understand that the focus that I'd had on race my whole life was not an anomaly, that many Black people, Black women, etc., have this focus on race because that's a part of our heritage and where we've come from. So that was an important lesson I learned from her. And then the other ancestor I'll call in is my great aunt Althea. There she is, sitting amidst all of, these are my father's paternal side. That's actually my father over there. And great aunt Olive paid for my piano lessons. She also taught voice lessons to Coretta Scott King. And in a letter Coretta Scott King wrote, for those of you who are not familiar, Coretta Scott King is the wife of Martin Luther King Jr. She wrote about my great aunt in demonstrating a certain kind of presence around justice and an orientation towards justice. And that was interesting to me to read that in that letter because all I knew of my great aunt was that she was a piano teacher. And here she was, this simple woman who was a piano teacher, lived next door to her parent, to my grandparents. And she had such a rich way of being in the world. And so I offer that up as just a possibility for us to take forward. So I'd like to invite Petra.
Friends, I would love to call in my mother's mother, Anna Dushinsky, and she came to southern Buffalo from Poland, and she loved food, and I love food, and she didn't have a lot of money, I can relate, but she loved to welcome everybody to her table. So I'm so honored to join you tonight. Thank you all so much for coming, and thank you, Anna, for being such an ancestor and such a good ancestor. I'd also love to call in my honorary grandmother. Fannie Lou Hamer is an amazing woman. And here is a little quote, a little taste of the joy and radiance and resilience of Fannie Lou. So when you've got 400 quarts of greens and gumbo soup canned for the winter, nobody can push you around or tell you what to say or do. Tell him, Fannie. So she is here with us. tonight as well.
So we have a full program planned for this evening. And we're so glad that so many of you have decided to join us in this venture. So for today, we are planning to just go into some introductions. We're going to go over some kind of guides or suggestions for how to possibly sit with this kind of material. Then we'll go into some storytelling around some key questions that we've kind of come up with together. And then we have some special guests, and we're so excited to share who those special guests are. They're going to be joining us after 6:30. And I should say that all of you are very special guests, of course. But the two gentlemen who are joining us tonight, which we hope to make that a regular part of the program. The two gentlemen joining us tonight are Finger Lakes residents themselves and have been doing this work for many, many, many years. So we honor them and respect them. So they'll be here with us to introduce themselves after 6:30. And then we'll go into a presentation a little bit after that will kind of get into the meat or the protein of this work and, you know, laws and policies. We'll have some dialogue around that after the presentation, again with our special guests, and that will be for tonight. And then I think let's go into, I'm going to queue up just for folks who just joined us, because we want this to be very interactive today. And so I want to share some suggestions for how to do that. So just, everybody should be able to see the Zoom logistics on the screen. Obviously the mute is down there in the bottom left-hand corner. Then to do your video or not, it's there. We encourage video just because it helps us to see your faces, and that's just a wonderful way of being here together. And then finally, we are going to be using the chat feature a lot tonight. The logistics of having a dialogue with people such as yourself with 60 people on a Zoom call is extremely difficult. So what we're going to ask you is if you might try out using the chat feature and entering in your thoughts, questions, etc. there, and we'll remind you throughout. But you can see there I've highlighted the little thing that says chat there. So at this point, I'd like to invite you all to welcome in what ancestors you would like to call into this space using the chat. So try that out. If you want to introduce yourself and say kind of which part of the Finger Lakes you're in, maybe your names and where you are in the Finger Lakes, as well as if there's somebody you like to call in, please go ahead and give that a shot.
And maybe as we're sharing those, we could give the overview of where we're going in the next couple of weeks as well. And Becca, could you bring up the slides? Because there is a lovely quote that we would love to begin with. Just in thinking of where are we going in the next 3 Tuesdays together, today being one and amazing. So it's really just aiming to lean in and to grow a little more comfortable with discomfort, and thinking about learning and uplifting and really activating ourselves. And so with this, there's a quote with the next slide that's one of my favorites of all time from Reverend Jen Bailey. And let's bring up that next slide. Would you like to
share a little bit about who we are before we go into the quotes?
Oh, well, this was kind of the overview.
Okay.
Of the
going
3.
Next.
But we could do. Yeah. And thanks for joining us, Jessica. Thanks for joining us, Heather. Amazing. So when I think of what are we doing these 3 weeks together, this is what we're doing. Relationships are built at the speed of trust, and social change happens at the speed of relationships. So we are building relationships. Mana, so glad you're with us. We are building relationships here today, and I'm honored to love Becca so much, and so many other people in my life so much. And it's that love that brings me to this work. And I hope that we'll continue us all to lean in these next 3 weeks together, especially when we find ourselves in moments of discomfort, and that we can continue to lean in and take that love out into the world as well. So yes. And there's a photo
Wonderful.
of Reverend
Welcome,
Jennifer
Denise
Bailey.
from Naples.
Yes.
Earl Green from Los Angeles. Wow. Welcome, Los Angeles. Oh.
Julia Macedon, amazing.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Do you want to go into your intro first, or would you like me to start?
Oh, Becca, start us off.
Okay. So my name is Rebekah Williams, and that's spelled with a K-A-H, no C's. And I was born and raised in Buffalo, New York, but then had the wonderful opportunity to spend time at the Rochester Folk Art Guild, which I see some of our friends from the Guild on the call, so welcome to you all. And that love of the Guild and love just in general is also on this call, brought me here to the Finger Lakes. And so now I live here near Naples, New York. And the work that I do tends to be what is called food systems work or food justice work. And I won't talk too much about that this time. There might be time for that in the future, but I do work statewide with Black farmers across the state. I also do work in Buffalo, New York, for an urban agriculture organization there. So that is, oh, and I should just say that I entered into this work very fully in about 2018. And when I say this work, developing a racial analysis. So as a Black mixed race woman of German Swedish ancestry, I've been very conscious of my race my entire life. And it wasn't until 2018 when I started seeking out my dad's family that I really started understanding my own relationship to my Blackness. But also, I should also say, many workshops and trainers and friends and dialogue also helped me to understand this. So I encourage all of you on this journey. So welcome and thank you.
Amazing. And just briefly, I'm Petra. I'm Petra Page-Mann, and I grew up here in Naples. And if you don't know, Naples is a beautiful community, quite rural, about 2,000 people, 92% white. And I grew up in a family. My parents were very progressive and, solidly kind of lower middle class. And so I grew up thinking that, I'm human and all humans are human, and that I'm a good person and we're all good people. And I definitely associated racism with like overt acts of violence and the KKK, and and that also racism was something that happened to other people, to Black and brown people. And so, for example, my first kind of boyfriend in high school, Typhon from Vietnam, he had not white skin. And that's when I realized, when we would walk around town and people would look at us differently, that's when I realized, oh, this thing exists and it's real. And my interest in food systems, and then getting to know different parts of justice and inequities and just bona fide exploitation and modern day slavery in our very modern food system has further just exposed deep fissures of interest and injustice. So I'm a farmer, a seed keeper, a storyteller, and it's such a joy to be saving seeds and sharing their stories, but also beginning to plant myself in this work of anti-racism and just spreading that love of food and seeds and stories. And just let's be really honest about how we are leaving this planet better than we arrived. So becoming good ancestors together is part of the work that I'm so grateful to be here tonight with us all for. And P.S., did I mention I love Becca? So it's like so much of it is just love, love, love.
So Petra, you walked us through the quote that's here, and you did put a picture of the lovely Reverend Jennifer.
Yes.
And her name is covered up, but you're going to take us through this next piece as well.
Yeah, so here's Resmaa Menakem is an incredible person, and his recent podcasts with Krista Tippett on the On Being podcast are absolutely extraordinary. But here he also wrote an exquisite book, and he's a neuroscientist that specializes in trauma and kind of the intersections of race. And so I'd love to he has all of these exquisite embodied experiences. And this is just one that I would love to ground us all as we move into the rest of our program and time together. So find yourself wherever you find yourself in your body, in a comfortable place. And let's take a few deep breaths together, allowing ourselves to relax, our stomach muscles to tense and then relax, our brow to relax. And now think of a person, of an animal, perhaps a place you feel safe, that you feel secure. A person, an animal, a place you feel loved and loving. And let's imagine that right now, that person, that animal is right beside you. We're right in that place, and you're safe, and you're secure, and you are so loved and so loving. And breathing naturally, but perhaps a little deeper than normal. Let's just feel that bodily, physical experience of safety, of being held. And notice, what does this physically feel like in our bodies? And now let's look around. Let's look to our left and over our shoulder. Let's look to our right and over our shoulder. And let's look directly behind ourselves before we turn to face the screen again and find ourselves here and now, in this present moment, in our bodies, in this physical bodily awareness of deep presence and accompaniment together. So thank you, Resmaa, for sharing. That is just one of so many exquisite embodied experiences that can begin to accompany us on these journeys. And here are some words from Mickey Scott Bay Jones that I also love to begin with. And this is a poem she wrote, an invitation to brave space.
I really loved, Petra, when we practiced this together and just inviting people to put their hand, your right hand on your stomach and your left hand on your heart. And then Petra's going to read this piece, but we like to invite people to read along. So wherever you are, stay on mute. We discovered once that if you're off mute, then it's all not synchronized. So just, we can listen to maybe Petra and my voice. I can read it out loud as well, and we can move through this together. So just an invitation to brave space. Right hand on your stomach, left hand on your heart, breathing deeply.
Together, we will create brave space, because there is no such thing as safe space. We exist.
We exist in the real world. We all
We
carry
all
scars.
carry scars, and we have all caused wounds.
In this space,
we seek to turn down
the volume of the outside world.
We amplify the voices
that fight
to be heard elsewhere.
We call each other
to more truth and love.
And we have the right to start somewhere
and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know.
We will not be perfect. This space will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be.
But it will
be our brave space together. And we work on it side by side.
Nikki Scott Bay Jones, thank you for those wise, wise words. So next, we want to just quickly touch in on whiteness. And here's the thing, whiteness was not created by any human alive today, but it's maintained and upheld by everyone with white privilege. And that is everyone that identifies as white and also passes as white. And let's back it up. So could you go back to Rebekah? Perfect. Oh yeah. So just to totally clarify these brilliant words of Courtney Hahn, white privilege doesn't mean that your white life hasn't been hard. It does mean that your skin tone hasn't made your life harder. And to be totally clear as well, there are so many forms of privilege, right? There are socioeconomic, there's male privilege, there's heterosexual, cisgender privilege, there's able-bodied privilege, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. So there are so many privileges. And thank you for those words, Courtney. And another piece of white privilege, I love this, Peggy McIntosh, she wrote in the 80s, the late 80s, this beautiful piece, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, which I think is just such a perfect analogy, hi Peggy, for this work. And I just love to read that. So imagine white privilege as an invisible package of unearned assets that I can count on cashing in each day, but you know, it's kind of meant to remain oblivious to me that I'm actually using them. And so these privileges afford me, they can be, for example, think of them in your knapsack as tools, as maps, as guides, provisions, passports, clothes, a compass, blank checks to navigate the world. So these are all unearned things that just by having that whiteness, whether you identify or pass as white, these are privileges that we have in the world. Peggy's work is quite remarkable. And so these kinds of privileges have created, let's jump into the next slide, Becca, have created, you know, white supremacy, which in my understanding of white supremacy from decades ago, I associated white supremacy with the KKK. And it's been a real revelation for me in the last few years to realize that it's a great disservice that we do to think of white supremacy as acts of violence, that in fact it's a culture, and we'll define culture very shortly, but it's baked into every single piece, every institution, the way that we communicate with each other. And it's just this deeply embedded superiority that we have that we don't even see, we don't even think of, because it's awful to think about. And so it's this, we live in a very white supremacist culture that we all are benefiting from as white people. And that's just such an important place to understand that it's not us personally, and it doesn't mean that we're bad people. It just means that, you know, we're not responsible for it, but we are accountable for learning more and for helping other people learn more. But dismantling the supremacy in ourselves is our work first and foremost. So let's jump to the next slide, Becca Love.
Okay, I want to let you know it's 6 o'clock.
Ooh, yeah, let's go. So then white fragility is the final piece that I would love to piece and weave into this, where with this, these are words from Robin DiAngelo, author of White Fragility, which is one of the most incredible books that I could possibly recommend. And socialized into a deeply internalized sense of superiority, white folks are either unaware or we can never admit to ourselves we've become highly fragile in conversations around race. And we find any challenge to our racial worldviews a challenge to our very identities as good and moral people, which triggers a range of defensive responses. So this is, of course, I'll be spending the rest of my life unpacking my own white fragility. And it's something that we'll be exploring more. But it's really important as we move forward with any discomfort that we feel is largely masking a fragility that we have as white people in this work, in this space, learning and growing. So yes, next slide is just a little, and so thank you, Robin DiAngelo. And so our work as white folks is to be curious, not furious, right? To be interested and to just want to learn and dig deeper rather than just letting our defenses. And you can so physically feel that as well as emotionally, psycho-spiritually, and to let these new and often heartbreaking perspectives ultimately become heart-opening for us. If we're not breaking, we're not doing the work. And Becca, I think you have some wonderful words about discomfort.
Yeah, I'm ready. Yep. So I wanted to share actually one of my friends and colleagues who was on this call, Jessica Gilbert, which I saw her name come up in the chat, from Rushville, New York. I didn't catch what else she wrote about herself, but if you saw her in the chat, this is her words. We have been working on co-publishing an article together on pathways to reparations, land and healing through food justice. And this is for a peer-reviewed journal entitled Human Geography. And there was something in the introduction that Jessica wrote to herself. You know, she mentioned growing up as a white privileged woman in rural New York, and then moving to Buffalo in 2015, where she was introduced to these concepts around racial justice. Mm-hmm. And she says, I write this all here in the hopes that readers, particularly those like myself who've benefited from white privilege, will understand that learning to be an effective ally is a long and often difficult process. Acknowledging white supremacy, listening, undoing assumptions, stepping back to let others lead, and recognizing when my actions are problematic and correcting them are just some of the steps that I have taken. This is an uncomfortable process and one that I do not think will ever truly end. However, the process and learning to sit with the discomfort is critical. Thank you, Jess, and thank you for letting me share those words. So I wanted to introduce a concept to get us started in this next piece of the agenda around community guidelines, which is around bringing attention to the somatic experience. And the somatic experience, so somatics, for those of you who aren't familiar is the describes any practices that use the mind-body connection. And you may be able to tell that I'm cheating by just reading this off, but as somebody who was a Tai Chi practitioner for many years and have done yoga, and so maybe some of you are familiar with those kind of practices. They're the kinds of things that can help you tap into that mind-body connection. But somatics describes practices that uses the mind-body connection to help you survey your internal self and listen to signals your body sends about areas of pain, discomfort, or imbalance. And doing these kind of somatic practices can help you work towards healing and wellness. And I just wanted to share that as a suggestion for this evening to experience, to sit with some of those somatic acknowledgement, the physical sensations that you experience while we're moving through the stories and stuff in the program. You're on, Petra.
And our next guideline is when we speak and share, to be sharing from our own experiences using I statements. And, I love the phrase calling in. As we call out, it's so easy for me to call out poor behavior that I see in the world, but rather, how do I actually call in that behavior so that we all are leaning in rather than leaning out, and questioning the assumptions that I'm making, like, where do those come from? First and foremost, before I'm thinking about the assumptions that I am assuming other people are making. So just another key to keep in mind. And also we seek dialogue rather than debate. It's a really strong part of white culture to win the argument. And there's right and wrong, there's a binary. And just want to invite us that in all of these conversations, we're focusing on the open-endedness, the learning, the collective sharing, the understanding that we're striving for. And, we're questioning ideas. We're not questioning people. This is construct, not character, that we're critiquing. And a final note in this vein, I love the phrase yes and rather than yeah but. So rather than saying yeah but this, it's like yes, and how are we adding to this body of understanding rather than diminishing something someone else has shared. And I also love this phrase as well, move up, move up. And you might have heard, in a group of people, there will be some people that speak more and some people that speak less. And a phrase that I've heard for years to kind of move those circles in different ways is saying, well, step up and step back. If you don't often speak up in groups, well, step up. And if you often speak more, well, then step back. And what I would love to lift up here is that it's just, I don't love the linearness and also the hierarchical nature of that. So I love the reframe of move up, challenging ourselves to proactively listen and also to proactively share. So yes, if you are often a person that wants to jump in more, whoa, how can we listen more? But if you also like to listen more and let's all be moving up the mountain together.
So I wanted to offer a tool that I got in a facilitation training called noticings, rather than evaluations. So noticing is a tool for examining something non-judgmentally and openly. It can be useful when self-reflection or analysis is useful, for example, in conflicts, etc. It can be elicitive and democratic. So essentially what we're talking about is using noticings as observations without judgment, rather than an evaluation, which is more of a judgment thing. So they could be observations about facilitation, so choices that Petra and I made in the facilitation, group dynamics regarding anything that is happening in the workshop, or personal process, anything that you are curious about, any observations or questions you might have, we'd really like to invite you to share those things in the chat again. And once we move more into the program and Petra and I get more of a flow into who is sharing a story and who is womaning the chat, we'll be able to respond more and engage you more in the chat there too. So we are looking forward to that. So inviting you to use the noticings tool for that reason. And then finally, self-care is essential. As we do this work, it's very important that you just do what you need to do. So breaks are welcome. We will have a bio break at hopefully at 6:30. We're trying to move along. And that will be a brief, few minute break for folks to get up and stretch. But in the meantime, please get up and stretch. And if you want to, stretch in the background, we won't judge you. So go ahead and do what you need to do. And as it says there on the bottom, these are living dynamic agreements by us and for us, and we welcome you to add your insights to the chat. So if there's additional things that you would like to see in these agreements, please add to it. And we plan to share out these agreements and this whole slideshow after the presentation tonight.
And we'd love to finish this community guidelines piece with this wonderful quote from Melissa Carter. My hope is holding the hand of my rage. My trust is holding the hand of my grief. My grace, holding the hand of my confusion. My empathy, holding the hand of my judgment. Our collective resilience, holding the hand of my pain.
It's Melissa Carter. Thank you for that quote, Melissa Carter. And so the next few slides, I'm actually not going to go into the definitions. I don't typically do definitions as part of workshops that I do. But so I'm just going to let you know that these are here and you can come back to them. So culture, inherent bias, cultural racism, systemic racism. And there we go.
So Becca, let's talk. Here we are. What does it mean when we say racism is bigger than an individual in a specific moment?
So let me just preface this by saying, as we were preparing for these workshops together, this is the first workshop that Petra and I have done in collaboration. She had suggested, somebody found how to draw on the screen. She had suggested that story rather than just talking at you all. So I prepared a story in response to this. And the story is my story from when I was 18. I was a senior in high school, and I was going with a friend of mine to look for apartments. We were going to be moving in together the next year, and we went to see this apartment, and I remember being so impressed by it. It was humongous, and couple floors, I think, lots of rooms. And as the landlord was walking us around, I was getting ready to think, oh, how am I going to buy my friend and I time to talk it over before the landlord gives it away to somebody else? Because it just is perfect. I'm so excited. So when we came to the end of the walk around and I was ready to ask my question, I said, so, how quickly do we have to move? Have you shown this place to so many people? And he kind of paused, and it might be that for me, this is such a somatic experience again, that I'm not sure how much he paused, but the moment was frozen for me because there seemed like a pause. And then he said, I had said, how many people have you shown it to? And he said, oh, not that many, just those niggers. And he literally said the N-word to me. And I remember in that moment, I actually feel it right now, like my hands are clammy and sweating up like a little bit. And I remember feeling nauseous and just kind of in a moment of shock, right? And so you might wonder why I'm sharing that story. What does it mean? Racism is bigger than an individual in a specific moment. The reason I'm sharing that story is because I want to dig a little deeper in this guy, right? So let's say this guy is not just a landlord. He's the guy in the housing loan office who makes decisions about who he's going to lend money to. Let's say this guy is the real estate agent who chooses where people get to look at places. Now, if he takes that same attitude and sets of beliefs regarding the statement he made to me, to all of those situations, I'm just asking you to go deeper with me. So I'm going to take a moment and we're going to pause from the video. I'm sorry, from the slide, and I'm going to queue up.
And if anyone would love to share responses, questions in the chat, we abundantly welcome you to. So we'll be sharing a back and forth dialogue about this. So definitely jump right in and ask your questions, share your observations.
So I'm going to be sharing a video. It's on YouTube, and I'll read the intro for everybody as we go into it. Make sure that you all can see my screen. So I guess how many people are familiar with Lee Atwater? Can mention in the chat. An advisor for, okay, Ronald Reagan. Everybody here all right? So in 1981, the legendary, brutal campaign consultant Lee Atwater was working in Ronald Reagan's White House when he was interviewed by Alexander, and I might be brutalizing the last name. In this audio made public for the first time ever, Atwater lays out how Republicans can win the vote of racists without sounding racist themselves. And I want you just to take the story that I just shared and put that up next to this video. And just, if you can sit with that and the considerations from that, and we're going to move into the video now.
Here's how I would approach that issue as a statistician or a political scientist, or no, as a psychologist, which I'm not, is how abstract you handle the race thing. In other words, you start out, yeah, now y'all are quoting me on this. You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger, that hurts your backfire, so you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want is much abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger, nigger, you know. So any way you look at it, race is coming on the back burner.
Becca, that is so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing. I wonder if you had any further communications with him. And my heart just breaks thinking about how we all move forward. And I see there's yeah. Ralph says, I have a visceral reaction every time I hear the N-word. And I hear you. Lynn agrees. I do too. I think we all do. And a comment around how do we respond to these kinds of words? And I think we will definitely be touching on this in future programs, where we'll really be breaking down language.
Well, I would love to just respond to that question. I think that was
Please.
a good, excuse me while I'm doing my tech, trying to figure out the tech issue. There we go. I mean, I guess the question that comes up for me, which we don't have to answer, but, so the question that you just read off, Petra, is how do you respond to that? And I think that's the question that all of us need to ask ourselves, and that we continue to explore ways of, as Petra said, calling in other folks to see what happens. And there might be a time when calling out, I'm actually, when you're talking about overt racism, I mean, there is a time to call out. And so I'm just going to pull out the next slide, which is that, essentially that there are differences between overt and covert racism. And so in the overt moment, those might be times, in my opinion, to call out. And we'll have our special guests on later to share with us their thoughts on that as well. But there's time for calling in, and there's time for calling out. And I think that there's a moment when you feel that, when you have that visceral reaction. I saw somebody write that in the chat, that visceral reaction, that's an opportunity for you to stop and ground yourself, find your strongest stand, and figure out, how do I respond to this? Sorry, I think we had some disruption, but how do I respond to this in a way that is a response? Yeah, so Peter, 3 deep breaths, that's great. And just in light of time, we are going to move into just a couple other things that were there. There's the opposite of overt racism being covert racism. And that's the kind of racism that goes along with what we had in the definitions earlier in terms of the inherent bias, which we'll encourage you to look at. But those are just things, and noticing our own behaviors. I think that is really critical in unpacking where we stand with these things. But yeah, so that would be not what I witnessed with that landlord, and not what we saw in the Lee Atwater video. And then finally, just want to lift up the reality of redlining practiced by mortgage lenders that refuse to lend money or extend credit to borrowers in certain areas of town or other for discriminatory reasons. It can also apply when real estate agents follow similar practices in showing homes. And we'll get into this later, but this is a real thing that continues on to this day. And unfortunately, too many people don't know about this. So. Oops, you are on mute, Petra.
How is that? Ta-da!
Better.
So some words from Ahmed Nurali. It's a privilege to learn about racism instead of experiencing it your whole life. Thank you, Ahmed. And we have another story that Becca will share, and I encourage us all again to share your responses, share your questions, insights in the chat as Becca shares or afterward, as you feel so moved. So here we are asking why it is problematic to say, I don't see color.
Yeah, when we were choosing these questions, I mean, this is a frequent statement that I have heard throughout my life when I start engaging with somebody in a conversation about race or racism, and they kind of say, what's the big deal? I don't see color. And when I say they, it tends to be white folks. It has always been white folks that say that. And so I think the first thing that I want to point out is just to be blunt. I mean, the landlord didn't see my color, did he? I am Black. So he didn't see my color. The point is that race is a lot deeper than color. And if you were to get into this work, you would understand that. So that's just the first thing I want to point out. The second thing I want to share is, I guess just I want to put terminology to what I just said. So if I were to have gone through that experience and purposefully didn't identify myself as my race, as being Black, I would have been doing something called passing. And that was something that was taught to me as wrong growing up. I grew up with my Black African-American father, my German-Swedish mother, and my two sisters who look very much like I do. And we grew up in Buffalo, as I mentioned, and a few times a year we would pile into the station wagon and drive to Baltimore, Maryland, where my dad's parents, they were both professors at Morgan State College, Morgan State University. And they were amongst some of the first Black folks in the country to get their PhDs, right? So I had a psychology, one of them, and math, the other. And when we went to see my grandparents, that house was so full of community. And we were there amongst family. And we would be there, and their African colleagues would come, their African-American sorority and fraternity brothers and sisters would come through. We would celebrate Thanksgiving there. And there were all shades of people, and we were all family. And that was my family. And there has never been a time that I didn't feel a part of my Black family or know that that was who I was. So to have somebody not see me and not see me for who I am was part of the shock. It wasn't just the N-word. It was, for me, realizing that he didn't see. So when somebody says they don't see color, I think it's deeper than that. It's first acknowledging that you don't actually have a racial analysis of what race and racial categories are and what has been created in this country through that. And second, it's also kind of putting a stop to the conversation. So I just wanted to share that story. Before we move into the definitions, there's passing there. We're going to go to the chat and just see what's coming up for folks.
Yeah, thank you everyone for diving into the chat. It's really delightful to see everyone's sentiments. And it doesn't say we don't.
That's great. Sorry, go ahead.
No. I love that Lindsay said it also doesn't respect diversity and all the positives that diversity brings to our world. Yeah, there's so many layers.
Wanted to lift up the article shared in the chat. That sounds good. And, thanks to Lauren for pointing that out. So just a couple other things to encourage you to consider colorism. Not sure how many folks have heard of that term in the past. Discrimination by which those with lighter skin treated more favorably than those with darker skin. Obviously that was what was being presented to me by that landlord, right? And privilege, which we've already gone into. So.
One of my favorite moments of learning about that phrase, Claudia Rankin describing on a flight once talking with a wonderful human that she was otherwise like so enjoying talking with. And then he out of the blue mentioned, oh, and by the way, I don't see color. And she said, that means you don't see me. And I love thinking of her calling him out, but also calling him in on that plane. And, you know, they had already been sharing a conversation for many minutes about music they loved and art and things they loved. And so they had this relationship to lean into. So then she could leverage something that was going to be hard for him to hear. But then he could really hear it because he had already seen her in so many other ways. So I love that reframe of it as well.
I like what Laura says here too. She says she thinks it is motivated by denial of white privilege and avoidance of engaging in the reality of race. Totally,
Laura. And here's should we quote it up? So a lovely quote from Austin Channing. Could you scoot it back to the quote, Becca?
I'm trying to find my cursor there.
That happens to me all day long. Where is that little mouse? What if instead of longing for ease, we were made for more? Made to advocate, made to dig in, made to speak out, made for complexity, made for this moment. What if we believed so deeply in our own capacity to rise to this occasion that getting to work wasn't a tiring chore, but a life-giving opportunity to invest in something larger than ourselves? Austin Channing. And we have a beautiful face of Austin Channing for you as well. So now we have a bit of a bio break because we are biological phenomena.
Petra, you are on mute.
Why, thank you. Welcome back. I am so glad that we're all here. Can we just stop for a moment and think about all the other millions of things on our minds, on our hearts, in our worlds? And yet here we are. It's kind of incredible. So I just want to send out so much love to you all for choosing to join us and make us even bigger us this evening. This is just the beginning, and it sends shivers down my spine.
So welcome back, everybody. And We are so excited, and I'm going to like skim through all the beautiful faces just for a moment, and I spot one, and don't quite spot the second, but maybe he will also come off of hidden video and come off of mute, and I'm going to invite our special guests, Earl Green, and I see you, Earl, if you want to come off mute. And hopefully Jim Wood is with us here tonight too. Oh, there you are, Jim. I see you now too. So if you'd also like to come off mute, if the two of you would like to join Petra and I, and I'm going to turn it over to the two of you for the next while to introduce yourselves. And thanks again for joining us. And in such late notice, I was so grateful that you both were able to do this. So I'm going to be quiet now. You can decide amongst you who will go first. Thank you.
Jim, I'm gonna let you go. I yield.
You beat me to it, Earl. I'm Jim Wood, and I noticed that Kit Fallon pointed out an overt racism in Wayne County. I'm here as an individual, but also representing Wayne Action for Racial Equality, which is a Wayne County-based anti-racism group that several people that I noticed in the picture gallery belong to. And we invite anybody else to belong as well. We're Wayne County centric for our action. So we've been in existence for 35 years, basically with a mission that's dedicated to ending racism through direct action, community education, engagement, and advocacy. To you, Earl.
Okay, all right. And I'm Earl Green. I am the president of the Wayne Action for Racial Equality in Wayne County. And I appreciate so much being a part of this discussion and being a part of this group. I think it is it is for me, very refreshing. And I've been engaged in several discussions, facilitating these discussions across the country via this virtual platform. Usually I'm on the road traveling doing this in person, but I have been, this week alone, I've facilitated at least 4 discussions around this issue and have more coming up on the national level. But I certainly appreciate your presentation. If you notice during the presentation, I was taking a lot of notes. So I'm always in a position to learn and to grow. And I just share with you, and it's something I shared in a previous discussion as well as in the discussion I had today, was that at some point as an African-American man, I get tired of having to explain racism to white people. I believe that this is a discussion that should take place. Particularly, I love facilitating it, but I think that one of the greatest tools of unpacking all of this and relearning and going through the process of unlearning some of the stuff that we thought we knew and learning new information is that for white people to have a discussion around this and paying attention to the impact it has had on the African-American community and communities of color. And what I'm talking about is the systemic racism that was so profoundly discussed today. Because I just think that when we talk about racism, racism is a problem for this country, but racism has never been a problem for Black people. Racism is a white person problem. And the minute we come to the realization, and I think we have, if you pay attention to what's been happening in this country, you pay attention that it's not just Black people who are banding together to dismantle systemic, institutional, and structural racism, but we're noticing it's all people. All people have band together. And this is one of the first, and I believe that this is a revolution for this country. In spite of what the past has shown us and what has that taught us. We're seeing for the first time in a long time in our nation where all people, regardless of ethnic background, all people are banding together to address this issue and to finally do something to change the system. So that is greatly appreciated. And I'm just glad to be a part of the process. Thank you so much.
Again, thank you to both of you for coming, and we're going to ask you to stay with us. I have a presentation that I would like to share with everybody on the Zoom call tonight, and I'm going to go through that presentation, and then I'm especially thankful that the two of you are here to continue after the presentation to just pull out anything that you that really stood out to you. And so I'm just going to cue that.
While you're queuing it up, you reminded me, Earl, of one of my favorite Audre Lorde quotes, which, like, every single quote, I'm like, oh no, that's my favorite. But she said, you know, revolution is not a one-time event.
Right.
So yes, we are right here with you and with each other.
So now I'm explaining first that I did not, whoops, let's go back. I did not make this presentation. I mentioned in my opening that I have had the pleasure of being privy to many workshops and trainings. I'd imagine that if I had met Earl before the last few weeks, or Jim, I would have attended their training. So this is a training that somebody else led, and they have, they shared out their PowerPoint as open source, but I wanted to make sure to give them credit. So this is the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy. They're based in New Orleans. And I was privileged enough to be at this conference called Common Bound. It was in Buffalo, New York, where I said I'm from back in 2016. And I was so intrigued with the title of this presentation, Race and Energy Democracy. And I owe you all the name of the amazing, amazing woman. Unlike Petra, I forgot to put her face up here, or her name even. I know it's Colette, but we are bringing back part 2 of this presentation next week. So I will promise to have her name and picture up here so you all can be introduced to her virtually that way. But I would encourage you to check out the Gulf Coast Center for Law and Policy. So, what is race is the question. What is race? So these forms are something that I am very familiar with, and I'm sure many of you may also be familiar with these. And growing up, I was always baffled at what box I was supposed to check. And all different people would tell me different boxes that I was supposed to check. So yeah. Let's just look at some of these. What is person 1's race? White is box 1. Box 2 is under 9. Black, African American, or Negro. Then the box under that, American Indian or Alaska Native. And then you've got all kinds of breakdowns under that. But white is just one box. Just want to leave that there for a moment. So does race only exist in America? No, absolutely not. Unfortunately, I don't know too much about the background of race in other countries. I'm only beginning to really try to understand race in this country as I become privy to the history of laws and policies around race in this country. But here we have the racial hierarchy in Mexico. And we'll go into the term mestizo in a little bit. It's unfortunately put up there next to mulatto, which is a term that I was always taught was derogatory, and we'll show why at some point. But So, but even there amongst these mixed white Mexican American Indians, you see that hierarchy of the mestizos with the lighter skin tone on the above, and then the darker skin tone below. So I'm going to just start with acknowledging that this is something I've heard a lot of people say. There's only one race, right? The human race. Race is a social construct. So the reason why I like this presentation is because it starts here. It starts here. I'm going to say that again. It starts here. Race is a social construct, but it has very real consequences, right? So it can shift over time. The categories are generally determined by the dominant group. In many different countries, the way you see race relations play out it's very different everywhere you look, and you'd have to study those cultures, those countries themselves. And, you know, different ethnic groups. I'm just thinking of Rwanda right now and what went on there. But, you know, so it looks different in every country, right? So, but what we do know is that it's generally determined by the dominant group and it has very real consequences. So land, wealth, and citizenship are privileged. So prior to the American Revolution, voting in colonial America was a privilege restricted to white males who owned property. And these restrictions were to ensure the influence of votes came from those who held a significant stake in the community. Significance was determined by land ownership, but again, only white males could own land or property. So US citizenship was one ability to, you know, racial consequence. So the process of officially being defined as white by law often came about in court disputes over pursuit of citizenship. And we'll get into that in a little bit. So I'm going to just highlight some things here. So laws and social structures, timeline of race in the US. 1619, the first slave ship brought to the US. And then we're jumping, well, here, this one here I think is critical. The Naturalization Act of 1719 offers naturalization only to any alien being a free white person. So again, what is white person? How is that defined? So there's at least 52 cases, people denied the status of white by immigration officials sued in court for status as white people. So people who were arguing that, you know, who came over to this country as immigrants like any other immigrants and were trying to argue that they were white so that they could receive the benefits of being white. And I'm definitely not going to read all of this, but some important things. 1857, the court held that slaves were chattel property. Slaves, as well as people who had been slaves or who descended from slaves, were not protected by the Constitution and could never be US citizens. I have some friends that like to say people that were enslaved, and I think I didn't go in here and change this, but that's a really important thing to acknowledge. And when we're talking about our ancestors, that language here is problematic. So the court held that people who were enslaved were chattel, they were property. They could never be US citizens, 1857, right? So then last slave ship, 1859, Emancipation Proclamation is 1863. And what's missing here too is our Juneteenth festival, which does happen in 1865 as well, but that's not here. And so I'll move on from that and we'll talk about that later. But the Naturalization Act of 1870, African nativity and to persons of African descent, other non-white persons were not included. The federal law created systems of control for the naturalization process again, and penalty for fraudulent practices. The Chinese Exclusion Act, this is important, and I think something for me that I think about a lot when we're here in rural areas is how Chinese folks have also been impacted by these kind of laws. And I would urge people to look at their communities. And something I noticed when I moved here is that there's this Chinese fast food restaurant, and I've tried to figure out how to befriend the folks in the restaurant, just because I'm sure they're lovely people like everybody else here. And I just wonder sometimes how they are included or not within the community. And there's all kinds of history regarding how Chinese folks have or have not been able to participate in our society equitably. And the whole reason why there's Chinese fast food restaurants the way they are in our rural communities and even in the cities are because of some of that history. So Chinese Exclusion Act, first major law restricting immigration to the United States for Chinese folks. Plessy versus Ferguson, very important, separate but equal, the Jim Crow segregation laws. And I'm not going to talk about that too much right now, hoping that somebody else will dive into that. I'm going to just move forward. Whoops. Oh, I was sure that there'd be so much more, because there is so much more. I think just in terms of Petra and my both working in food systems work, I would also point out the Bracero, I think I'm brutalizing the title, but the Bracero program, I believe, wartime agreement between Mexican and American governments, which allowed Mexican laborers to work in the United States under short-term contracts in exchange for stricter border security. So I want to just acknowledge that I want you to remember that, because the timing of that is critical in terms of our food system regarding Black folks and our movement out of agriculture. So that's something that we can also go into in more depth. So just to conclude, going back to the structural racism or the institutionalized discrimination, a system in which public policies, laws, institutional practices, cultural representations, and other social norms work in various, often reinforcing ways to perpetuate racial group inequity. It identifies dimensions of our history and culture that have allowed privileges associated with whiteness and disadvantages associated with color to endure and adapt over time. So I'm going to actually stop sharing and invite, I don't know if there's been comments in the chat, Petra, that you've seen, or questions, because I think what we would really love is to start off this conversation with either some questions that come up for Jim, Earl, or anybody. If people want to put their question in the chat, and maybe we can look at the questions there, or I would just invite Jim and Earl and Petra just to chime in with some key takeaways at this point. Actually, why don't we let Jim and Earl start off, if you don't mind, if one of you are ready to go. Earl, oh, there, perfect.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to answer, there was a question in the chat about the, explain why, and this is from Richard, please explain why whites can be racist, whereas Black people are prejudiced. I understand why, but I would like to hear your explanation. And of course, Peter chimed in, and Peter, you're right. It does denote a power dynamic where groups do have an advantage over others. One of the best ways for me to answer that question is to go back to understanding race itself being a social construct that has, and it's not based on, it has more to do with depicting one group above another. So when I hear terms like reverse racism, the first question is, when I hear people saying that Black people are racist, that's an indication to me that there has been a shift in power. That has not. um, because it can't, as long as we live in this society, and I experience this on a personal level, um, there will always be a dominant culture that controls everything, controls from everything from me being able to trade my vehicle in and getting a low interest rate, to me getting a mortgage on my house, to me being in a place of employment. Um, that's why we call it systemic racism, institutional racism, because it is embedded in the very system of this country. Racism is a system, and we have to understand it from that perspective. Now, the difference between prejudice and racism is all of us are prejudiced. We all have prejudices. We all have biases. But our prejudice and biases doesn't necessarily mean that they're embedded in the, as it relates to different ethnicities. We do have those as well. I'm biased. There are certain things I'm biased about. There are certain things all of us are biased about. But my power, and sometimes the way I describe racism, when I hear about reverse racism, me being an African-American man, or me being identified as that, being racist, I don't have the power to stop anybody from unemployment or from purchasing a home, for getting a mortgage. I don't have the power to control the interest rates based on a person's ethnicity. Those in power put that in place. So because I don't have that power, because the shift of power has not taken place, it's impossible for there to be reverse racism. And that's why I encourage everybody to truly understand really what racist policies are, and why would that term is even used. And when you look at going back to the timeline, there's a very clear indication that people of color in this country was powerless. People of color in this country were not even considered, particularly indigenous groups and groups of African descent. We were not even considered human. And then when you understand it, the whole basis of race is born out of that understanding. So when a person is not seen as being human, and one of the best examples of that, somebody asked me one time, why is it so easy for people, or let's say law enforcement, to kill African Americans? Well, you have to understand attitude. So I asked the question, why is it so easy for hunters to kill an animal? When a person goes hunting, they don't have that same feeling of despair and remorse as if they killed another human being. So if I'm seen as a Black man as not being human, it's easy to kill with no remorse, no guilt. So when you're looking at it from that historical context. And so when we understand it, when we truly understand race is so much more than just skin color, just like you said. It has a lot to do with the spirit of it, the idea that we were not considered human at all. The idea that, think about it. We're living on stolen property. And even in the 1924, when indigenous people were granted citizenship, really think about that. You're talking about Native Americans whose land was stolen, but yet they had to be determined as citizens of this country. How crazy is that? So when you really understand this thing from a historical perspective, it's really sickening. And it's really demeaning, demoralizing, dehumanizing. And so as an African-American man in this country, I fear for my life, because even today in the 21st century, we still have people who don't see me as a human being. They see me as an animal.
I think just what stood out for me and what you just said, Earl, is just we're not that far from a time when it was ingrained that point that African American people were considered chattel. It hasn't
Right.
been that long from them.
That's
And
right.
there's systemically different things that have been passed down in families, in laws and policies that have kept that mindset. So even if it's maybe not okay to have it be as blatant anymore, it's still in there. So, and Jim, do you want to chime in, or Petra, Jim?
I'll just jump in briefly, if possible. Earlier, there was a short quote that you had that told a story about a conversation on a flight. And the person said, "Oh, I don't see color." And what that means is that he doesn't see his own color. And I think we have been taught not to see ourselves, and I'm talking about white folks, as having a color. And that's because our power is so taken for granted that it becomes the norm. And the thing that we have to recognize, I think that's incredibly important, is we are the perpetrators, have been the perpetrators. We created the scaffolding that built the system of structural and institutional racism. And it's our responsibility to dismantle it. And we cannot rest until that superstructure is dismantled.
Oops, go ahead, Petra.
I forget who to credit with these words. I love slavery didn't end, it simply evolved. I know.
Was there more you wanted to say?
Oh,
about
Becca,
that,
the floor is yours.
I just wanted to lift up just some very vulnerable sharing in the chat, and appreciate this question, Bill. Thank you. And of course, I know who you are, Bill, and I can't see your face right now, but the question is, it is offensive to seek to cultivate a friendship with Black acquaintances if we don't have organic connection in our lives? Is it somehow artificial, breaking through my racial isolation? So I guess I think a really good starting point, and some people who've really stood out to me in my life, are people who purposefully put themselves in spaces where they are the minority. And I think this is important. I think, one, because we live in such a white supremacist culture where, if you think about the spaces of privilege that we're all taught that we're supposed to aspire to, higher education, big, corporate jobs, whatever. And then if you look at the racial dynamics of who make up those spaces, when as a person of color, as a Black woman, when I reach those spaces, I am often the only, and I have to be there in that space as the only. Even moving to this town, which I love, I often feel like the only, and I'm just going to leave it there. I'll just say the only, and some of you may know what I mean. The only Black woman, right? So I guess what I'm encouraging, Bill, and for others who are curious about that, is there's something that my dad, which Bill knows my dad, used to teach me when I was, in school and struggling with a subject. He'd say, try to find what you love in it. Try to listen and listen deeply and find in it what you love. Mm-hmm. So Bill, dig into Black culture, dig into the different spaces that you might not typically move in, and find places where there's an invitation for the public to come and go and experience what it feels like to be the only, first of all. And second of all, look for what you love. So I wouldn't say no, go make friends with said person if you don't feel an organic connection, but definitely seek out spaces and put yourself there.
Rebekah, one of the things that I encourage is piggybacking on what you just said. I think it's very important. In my presentation I did this past Friday for the New York State Council on Problem Gambling, I'm taking them through a process of having this discussion and changing the environment in their office space and their workspace. There are three things that I believe we should commit ourselves to. And the first one is committing ourselves to unlearning. Unpacking and unlearning what we know while being ready to take in new information. And seeking out educators and teachers who are able to, who are not replications of ourselves, but to learn something new. And then number two is engage in both formal and informal learning. There's something to be said about self-education. You know, do the search, do the research, educate ourselves. All learning does not happen in the classroom. And a lot of that learning happens through engagement and wanting to really know more. There's nothing like getting to know someone and, you know, asking questions. And then number three is diversifying.
Oh no, Earl, you just went on mute just for a minute. Number three is where you left off. I think we just had.
I'm sorry about that. So number three is diversifying your life and your work experience. Allowing yourself to cultivate organic relationships with people outside of your cultural group. Going to places where, you know, you don't generally frequent, getting to know different foods, different music, you know, go to different ethnic festivals, get engaged, change your taste buds, start reading more books written by authors of other cultures, you know, and all of these things make a very good difference in how we see things. So committing ourselves to unlearning, engaging in formal and informal learning, and diversifying our lives and our work experiences.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hope that helps.
That's a great framework. Thank you. Yeah. And so Holly, yeah, the task to tear down and rebuild the racist infrastructure is a daunting task, but for those of us who are living within it, we hope you feel it's a necessary task. Just based on what Earl, you were just saying too, just a sneak preview for next week. I'm not sure what we spoke about in terms of our plan for the 3 weeks, but here I'm sharing the cover of a book that we're going to share a story with you all next week, The People Could Fly. And this is a American Black folk tales told by Virginia Hamilton. Oh, and I love the artwork. And children's books were a big part of my life growing up. And I have many that celebrate African-American culture just because that was how we were raised. And so we're gonna share a story from this next week. And I just also wanted to, I don't remember, Petra, what we talked about in terms of the arc for the entire 3 weeks. But we really see this week as, do you want to share a little bit about that arc at this point, just so folks know what they'll be coming back to? And you're on mute.
Dun, dun, da, da. Yes. So we have some loose visions that we will be fleshing out, very much based on the needs and dreams of you all. So you'll see a touch of foreshadowing. toward the end, we'll be inviting you to share what you are hoping to get out of this time together. And certainly we're excited to dive more into, kind of the history, also the policy side, and then some actual tools to dig into how to speak about race as we unlearn these things in ourselves and as we move in our wider circles. And really with an ultimate goal of activating ourselves and each other to become together, right? So that moves from an intellectual experience and a personal experience and into the world. Very much as, I forget also who to credit this thought with, but this system of slavery, as it evolves, it has been defended. It was created and has been defended with such vehemence. And so we need to deconstruct it and dismantle and reimagine the world with that same vehemence. So what does that look like? What does that look like? So this is just the beginning. And I'll tell you now, at the end of the third session, we'll be like, all right, now is when we begin. So, and we'll always be saying that. But yeah, so it looks a lot like unlearning, continuing to dig into that unlearning, more storytelling, and then very much that activation with tools for talking.
Yeah, and I just want to add one thing that I'm really excited about is weaving in culture and Black culture throughout the presentation. I talk mostly about Black culture because that is how I identify. And I'm sure there's many, many other cultures that we could celebrate, but I believe that it's essential that we learn how to celebrate Black culture, specifically because of the legacy of trauma, and especially where we are today, seeing what happened with George Floyd and what happens with many Black people who've been dying too many to say. And so I think important for folks to get comfortable and acknowledge just some of the wonderful cultural aspects of the African diaspora. And so we'll be sharing some stories and videos and music, and you'll hear some old music possibly. You'll hear probably a little bit more new music. I don't think I see any super young folks on the call, so I think I'm safe saying new music, because the teenagers that I work with have told me that my music is old too, so 90s old music. But anyway, so excited to share many of those things with you all. And we also hope to have special guests each week. And I see some names on the call who we do hope to have join us in future weeks. And next week we'll kind of start right into probably the heady policy stuff, and then end on kind of a going up to see kind of like exciting what's the good work that's going on in the community. That's our hope. And then the final week will just be really about activation and how can we all move out into the world with this knowledge. So that's our vision for the 3 weeks. Before we close out, Earl, Jim, are there any invitations or final thoughts that you would like to share at this point?
I can't miss the opportunity, first of all, to recognize some expertise that's with us. I noticed that Windsor Wade just backed off the camera, but Windsor taught at the School Without Walls for many, many years as a social studies teacher. He now lives in Geneva. Here he comes back. And he has expertise in African American history for sure. Hi, Windsor. So I'm sure there's many people that are with us tonight that have other expertise. I'd also like to call out Peg Pelletier, who's with the Newark Library. Ware's partnered with them, and we had many titles in the Ware collection books and other forms of media, and the Newark Library honored that by establishing the Ware collection, and that's available to borrowers. And since we're on a library Zoom host here, that's a valuable thing that can be done, different extensions from that. So we are all about networking and taking advantage of opportunities to share our expertise, but also to take advantage of other expertise. And just one last thing, as you and Petra immerse us in some historical and cultural experiences, it's really important, I think, for all of us to immerse ourselves in our own culture, because when we understand ourselves, that's when, and we have self-love, this is when we can broaden that love to other cultures and have the courage to then enter into those cultures, as Becca says, as sometimes the only, because there's nothing better than an experience where you're in a cultural milieu and it's not yours.
Thank you for that, Jim. And you just also, before I pass it to Earl, we would be very amiss not to thank Jude and Judy from the Naples Library. The Naples Library was the impetus to kick off this series. This was the Conversations on Race and Racism. First came to the Naples Library in 2018, and then Judy requested that we bring it back now and took it to the other libraries. And Stacy, of course, who is hosting this from the Macedon Library, thank you for hosting this. And so just want to acknowledge that. And I'm going to turn it to Earl.
I just want to echo Jim's words, and I think that's very important for in this process to have all of us having a greater appreciation for our own cultures and understanding the origin and going back as far as you can to learn as much as you can. That is great. I do want to recognize Celeste. She's also part of the library system in Newark, and she's waving. It's good to see you, Celeste. But also, I just wanted to announce that she put it in the chat for everyone to notice, but they will be hosting a book club and reading titles, and these from the rare collection that Jim just mentioned at the library. And they will be starting with the book, The N-Word by Jabari Assam, and his this summer. So be looking for an invitation for that as well.
I'm watching these chats go through, and there's just so much that we can dig in here together on. And I think one of the most important things to remember is to start where we are. And really think about where you are individually situated within our country, within our systems. I think it's easy to become overwhelmed. So I think, well, I want to offer a couple of things first before we close up tonight. I'm going to drop into the chat what I left there is a video, and I can also send this out via email to everybody following, but I would encourage some homework. This is an hour and 40 minutes long. It's a video of Jeffrey Robinson, the ACLU's top racial justice expert, on the truth about the Confederacy in the United States. And there's a couple of questions that I'd encourage you all to ponder. So, what is the role of educational institutions in teaching our shared history? Why is it important to examine what we as a nation have memorialized and created monuments of? And what is the role of the media in shaping our collective consciousness? Petra.
Becca. I just want to lift up how grateful I am to have these very abstracted concepts be so real and embodied by each of us here tonight in our bodies. And Becca and Earl especially, I just want to lift you up as Black people who are taking your time to share time and space and your wisdom and your pain with white people. And I don't take that for granted. And it is absolutely up to white people to be dismantling this in ourselves and in our world. And I'm so honored to do this work. I have so much love and so much respect for you both. And I just want to lift up that it is love that brings me to this work, and love of you, Becca, and of so many other people that I love, including myself. And your joy is my joy. Your struggle is my struggle, and our liberation we will find together. And I'm just want to thank again Judy, oh my gosh, and all of you, Stacy and Greta, the amazing librarians that have stepped forward to make this a significant part of our communities and our community conversations. You know, certainly 400 years ago would have been a really nice time to have more real conversation. And perhaps the second best time is this moment right now. And I am so committed to unlearning all of these things in myself and still finding ways to love myself as I see all of these things, and just continuing to do this work personally, but also accountability in love, in relationship.
Petra, I just want to call attention to this wonderful thing that's going on in the chat. I was trying to figure out where it started, but I just wanted to appreciate all of you who are adding to these, of these amazing authors.
Yes, I noticed that myself. I was going to say something about that. But this is amazing. All of the authors.
These are great. Isabel Wilkerson changed my life a couple years ago. Thank you, Danielle. And down the line, I have a Toni Morrison book that would be your homework assignment. And Julia Butler and Adrienne Murray Brown, yes. Yep. Jerry Pinkney, children's book author, of course. Tana has
Eric Dyson.
Oh, shout out, Earl. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying Michael Eric Dyson.
Oh.
And Laura has a wonderful question. Can we save this chat and email this out to everybody? And it just lifts up for me too. We've just begun a conversation, and Becca and I are merely friends sharing these conversations. And now we are all friends sharing these conversations. There is no hierarchy in this whatsoever, if that wasn't already beautifully apparent. We are all in this together, and I can't wait to move forward. I am at your service and so ready to learn by your sides.
I want to, before we transition with a poem to close, I want to invite Judy, if you wouldn't mind, do you have on hand the libraries who sponsored this together? Can you either share with us verbally or put it in the chat, just because I want to acknowledge all the libraries. This was a group effort, and so the libraries really have come in together to make this happen. And, Petra and I are putting in a lot of work to think about the curriculum and the content and the visitors and all of this. And the time that we're taking to do that wouldn't have been possible without the library's support. So that is extremely, we have so much gratitude for you all. So I can see Judy starting to call them out. Naples Library, yes. Geneva Public Library, yes, excellent. Palmyra.
Yay.
Keep coming. Sodus, excellent. Newark, Gorham, Free. Ooh, it's moving fast. So yeah, those are in the chat. And thank you, Clyde-Savannah. Great.
Victor Farmington. Yes.
Great. Excellent. Thank you so much. And if, thank you all so much. And if you don't see your library on this list and want to encourage them to help out and support, that would be a wonderful show of support on your individual behalf as well. So I will just say that at this point. And I'd like to close, wow, oh, there. Thanks, Stacey. There's the long list, great. So, yeah, so just really want to put a shout out there to the libraries. Thank you, all of you. And I want to close with this poem. I had mentioned in the beginning, please, please, please look up Lorna C. Hill and Ujima Theater Company in Buffalo, New York. She's just a wonderful human. The theater company does amazing work, even though she passed on June 30th, just a few weeks ago. I know the lovely people who are still running that company, and they are a racial justice, environmental justice, social justice theater company, and just top-notch performances, really great. So if you are somebody who is goes through the Buffalo area, please check out Ujima Company Inc. There, maybe somebody might even look it up and put the website in the chat as well. So this was a poem that her daughter-in-law shared out with us when she passed. And what her daughter-in-law explained was that this poem really spoke to who Lorna was in her life. And I mentioned in the opening, when I mentioned why I was calling in Lorna, is that she really helped me understand and see how much race and my prevalent, like the way that I have always been so situated in my racial identity and trying to understand that, how that is a Black woman, and I am a Black woman. And I'm not sure if that makes sense to folks, but I'm just going to end with this poem. So, won't you celebrate with me? Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model, born in Babylon, both non-white and woman. What did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. That is Lucille Clifton, Won't You Celebrate with Me? So thank you, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful evening. We look forward to seeing you next week at 5:30 p.m., same Zoom line, hopefully same friendly faces. And thank you to our special guests too, Earl and Jim.
Earl, Jim, we love you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Recording, and now I'll play us some celebratory going on.